There's a ton of videos on YouTube talking about calories and fat loss, but none of them give you a guide on how to actually track your calories, which is exactly what I'm going to be doing in this video. I'm also going to be sharing 3 extremely common tracking mistakes towards the end of this video that could be causing you to eat significantly more calories than you think you are. So make sure to watch until the very end. Okay. Let's get right into it. How do you actually track your calories? First, you need to understand food labels. Pretty much every food that you buy at the supermarket will have one of these. The food label provides 3 very important pieces of information. 1, the serving information, 2, the number of calories per serving, and 3, the nutrient breakdown. The serving information tells you how much of the food is considered one serving and how many servings are in the entire package. The calorie section of the food label tells you how many calories are in each individual serving, not the entire package. For example, this food contains 280 calories per serving. Since this food contains 4 servings for the entire package, and each serving is 280 calories, the entire package contains 1,120 calories. Now that you know how to read a food label, you can use this information to track the calories in the foods that you consume. The first step is to measure the amount of food you consume by using a food scale. Even though the food label provides the serving size in both volume and weight, you always want to weigh your food whenever possible instead of using volume because it's much more accurate. Let me explain what I mean. A cup filled with 1 cup of white flour should weigh approximately 125 grams and contains about 450 calories. If you measure the flour using a measuring cup, you'd assume that every time you fill up your measuring cup to the 1 cup line, that it will weigh around 125 grams and it'll have about 450 calories. But that's not true. If the flour is clumped together or packed very tightly, you'll have more than 125 grams in 1 cup. On the other hand, if you sift the flour and it's not tightly packed at all, you may have less than 125 grams in the 1 cup. But if you weigh out 125 grams of flour using a food scale, you'll always have the correct amount independent of how tightly you pack the flour. So if you want to track accurately, make sure you weigh your food instead of using a measuring cup. After weighing your food, you need to determine how many servings you're consuming. Let's say that this food label belongs to a package of breaded chicken tenders and you consumed 350 grams of it. Here's how you would figure out the calories in those 350 grams. Step 1, divide the amount you consumed by the amount per serving to determine how many servings you consumed. If you ate 350 grams of the breaded chicken, you would divide that by 227 grams since that's the amount per serving, which means that you ate about 1.5 servings. Step 2 is to multiply the number of servings by the number of calories per serving. So you would multiply the 1.5 servings that you consumed by 280 since this food contains 280 calories per serving, which equals roughly 430 calories. It's as simple as that. You would follow the exact same step for the individual macronutrients as well. For example, if you wanted to figure out how much protein you consumed, you would take the number of servings and multiply it by the amount of protein per serving. Again, 1.5 servings of the breaded chicken multiplied by 15 grams of protein per serving would equal roughly 23 grams of protein. So you would use this process to figure out how many calories you consumed of a particular food. But what if you know how many calories you want to consume and instead you need to figure out how much of the food you need to reach that caloric target? Let's say you have 500 calories left to consume for the day and you want to know how much of that breaded chicken you should eat to equal 500 calories. Well, you would do the same steps just in reverse. First, figure out how many servings of the breaded chicken tenders you need to get to 500 calories by dividing the number of calories you want to consume by the number of calories per serving. 500 calories divided by 280 calories equals about 1.8 servings. Next, multiply the number of servings times the quantity per serving. 1.8 servings times 227 grams per serving equals around 400 grams of breaded chicken tenders. So if you want to consume 500 calories, you just have to weigh out 400 grams of breaded chicken tenders. Okay, so after determining the calories in your food, you're gonna need some sort of way to keep track of it throughout the day. The best way to do so is by using any of the popular calorie tracking applications that you can download on your phone. Some of the most popular apps include MyFitnessPal, Carbon, and MacroFactor. Another option is just to use an Excel sheet where you keep tabs of your food. So, to quickly recap, in order to track, you need the food label and you need a way to weigh your food. But what if you don't have either of those? Let's address each of these separately. If you're out at a restaurant or eating food on the go, you probably don't have a food scale and measuring cups available. So instead, you can just guesstimate. Sure, this isn't ideal, but it is better to guesstimate than just not do anything at all. You can use the size of your hand to estimate the amount of foods you consume and then use that volume estimate to estimate the caloric content of the food. On average, a fistful will be approximately 1 cup, a palm-sized serving of protein will be roughly 3 or 4 ounces, and a cupped hand will be about half of a cup. Sure, this isn't exact, but sometimes we just have to do the best we can given the situation that we're in and not obsess over tracking every single gram of every food that we eat. To err on the side of caution, just add 10 to 20% above the calories you guesstimate. We often significantly underestimate how much of something we eat, and at least this way, you can somewhat account for that underestimation. That's how you would deal with not being able to weigh your food. But what if your food doesn't have a food label? For example, if you go to your local butcher and buy some steak, it's most likely not going to have a food label. The same can be said for purchasing produce like fruits and vegetables. In these instances, you're going to have to look up the caloric content of the food in some sort of online database. The USDA provides a fantastic database that you can use to look up the caloric content of different foods. Let's say you're about to cook up 8 ounces of top sirloin steak and you want to know how many calories it contains. If you go over to the USDA database and you search top sirloin steak, you'll see a bunch of different options pop up. As you can see, there's going to be options for cooked versus raw, how trimmed the fat on the steak is, as well as whether it's USDA Select or Choice. Each of these options are going to be slightly different in terms of caloric content and macronutrient composition. So, which choice should you make? To be honest, it doesn't really matter all that much. You want to choose one that's going to resemble the food you're going to eat as much as possible, but what's most important is that you track using the same one each time. For example, if I have a USDA Choice 8-ounce top sirloin steak that I'm about to cook up and it has a bit of fat around the edges, I'd probably choose this option, 13931, since this option closely resembles the steak that I'm going to consume. If we go ahead and click on it, it'll open up the caloric content and macronutrient breakdown on the top sirloin steak, which is essentially the same thing as your food label. You have the portion size up top. For this steak, it's 4 ounces or 113 grams, and you have the calorie and macronutrient breakdown below it. As we can see, this steak has about 22.5 grams of protein per 4 ounces. You don't have to use the USDA database, but it is going to be way more accurate than just using Google because you can narrow down your food choices much more precisely. All of this information is great, but what if you're in a situation where you don't know how much food you're consuming and the foods are not easily found online? For example, let's say you're at a fancy Italian restaurant and you're eating some arancini, which is essentially a breaded and fried rice ball stuffed with cheese and other delicious stuff. Well, you really only have 2 options. Option 1, again, guesstimate using the process outlined previously and search the caloric content of arancini online. Let's be honest though, this is not going to be accurate at all. There's so much room for error here because it's impossible to account for the recipe used, and it's likely that the ones that you ate at the fancy restaurant are different than the ones being reported on Google. Sure, you're still tracking your calories, but it's not going to be that accurate and perhaps not even that useful. Eating out is undoubtedly a limitation of tracking your calories. To make guesstimating a bit more accurate, you can try and order meals that are mainly composed of single ingredient foods. For example, an order of arancini is going to be a lot more difficult to guesstimate than some rice, mixed veggies, and grilled chicken that you ask to be cooked without the additional oils or butter. Let's be honest though, sometimes we don't want to eat clean, and we simply just want to enjoy a nice meal out without stressing about calories. In which case, I recommend option 2. Don't worry about it and just enjoy your dinner. This is what I recommend most of my clients. Let's face it, unless you're preparing for a bodybuilding show where you have to be a certain weight by a certain time and every single thing that you put into your mouth counts, you shouldn't stress out over a meal out at a restaurant. Flexibility with your diet is important, and sometimes just taking a step back from tracking and enjoying a meal without worrying too much about calories is just what you need. If you go out to a nice restaurant like once a week, it's not going to have any negative impact on your overall weight loss progress, especially if you're adhering to your plan the rest of the week. Keep in mind that if you're eating out multiple times per week and you're attempting to lose weight, just enjoying yourself and not tracking every single dinner will certainly affect your progress if you're having calorie-dense meals and not accounting for them. You need to have balance. There is a third option, which you can compromise between options 1 and 2. And it's just allocate at least 1,000 to 1,500 calories for that dinner by eating less during the earlier part of the day. This may seem like a lot of calories, but trust me, it's really not. If you go to a nice restaurant, you perhaps split an appetizer, you enjoy a nice entree, and you have some drinks and/or a dessert, you're easily consuming at least 1,000 calories. All right, so far we've covered the basic fundamentals on how to track your calories, and it should give you a good starting point as well as confidence to navigate difficult situations like tracking your calories when you're eating out. But there's still one thing I want to go over, which are the 3 most common mistakes people make when tracking their calories. Before we get into the 3 mistakes, if you found this video useful so far and you enjoy my content, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. It helps me a ton, and you'll be notified when I release new educational content. It's a win-win. Thank you. Okay, so calorie tracking mistake number 1 is trying to remember what you ate at the end of the day. Some people try to remember what they ate and exactly how much they ate right before bed rather than tracking as they go throughout the day. Let's be honest, not only is your memory not great, but it's also impossible for you to remember the exact amount of each food that you ate. You probably forgot about the handful of chips you had after breakfast, or how much oil you used to cook the chicken that you ate for lunch. If you track this way, you're gonna mess up. Tracking takes time and effort, and if you're gonna do it, might as well do it correctly. All right, mistake number 2 is incorrectly tracking foods when they're cooked versus raw. When we cook foods, we alter the water content, which changes the caloric content per unit of weight. For example, when you cook an 8-ounce steak, it might lose 1 or 2 ounces of water due to evaporation. Therefore, the caloric content of an 8-ounce raw steak is different than an 8-ounce cooked steak. The cooked steak will be more calorie dense since it contains less water. On the other hand, when you boil rice, you increase the water content, so a cup of cooked rice will be less calorie dense than a cup of uncooked rice. Since the changes in water content of a food are so variable, it's best you track the majority of your foods in their raw form before cooking them. All right, lastly, we have mistake number 3, which is justifying not tracking little things. It's just a bite of a cookie. It's just a little bit of butter. It's just a sip of a drink. Although individually these things won't drastically impact your caloric intake, they can add up and they can account for several hundred calories consumed per day that go completely untracked. All right, guys, I've been talking for long enough. Let's go ahead and wrap this one up. Make sure to check out my video titled How Many Calories You Need to Get Lean if you're interested in learning about how many calories you should be eating. And if you've watched this far, go download my completely free ebook that covers the basic fundamentals of nutrition for fat loss. The link will be in the description below. Catch you in the next video. Peace.